I double, triple, pinky, mega promise, swear to you all that next Wednesday will be a super Q&A. I've opened the post already for Patreon people. I did say that this week was going to be, but it's not in the end. Let's do a regular episode of the Q&A. I think this is like episode 98, and I'm kind of concerned because I have absolutely nothing planned for episode 100, but I feel like it should be special. Q&As are one of the most long-running things I've been doing on the website, and I don't know, we should do something cool, but what? Maybe you guys can tell me in with your questions down below. So yeah, this is the Q&A. I try to do these each week. I take some questions from you all down in the comments, and we talk about various topics, usually Guild Wars related stuff. So if, as I talk here, anything comes to mind, feel free to drop a comment, I'll read it, and you could even be in the next video. So I've got a selection of questions, let's just jump straight in. First from Rotimi Aboina, who says, WP, a while back you made a video about Magic Find and how effective it really was, and part of the conclusion you drew was that it depended on the content that you do. Now that Path of Fire gives loot in the form of unidentified gear for different rarities that scales off of Magic Find, have you considered gathering a stack or two of each rarity of unidentified gear and comparing the sort of gear you identify at various levels of Magic Find? Yeah, that's a good question. So the video you're talking about is actually very old. You say it a while back, but I believe this was season 2 days. And, you know, this topic actually became more interesting even with Heart of Thorns, because I believe Heart of Thorns added a bunch of bags that get affected by Magic Find. So people who are out of the loop, when Magic Find was originally introduced, most of the places that it applied to weren't really relevant for most things that we did in the game. Like dungeon runs and things were big parts of farm back then, and Magic Find would never affect the amount of gold you'd get out of chests and stuff. But nowadays, a lot of those things you double click, those packages, and especially in Path of Fire, which has a lot of unidentified gear, these things do hit Magic Find. So it's an interesting topic. The weird thing now, though, is I've lived through 2 expansions of Guild Wars 2 at capped Magic Find for all of it. I don't think about min-maxing Magic Find at all anymore. It's something I kind of forgot is a part of the game. I'm still a big believer that they should raise the cap, but make it extremely more difficult to get extra individual percentages, just so that it feels somewhat nice to continue unlocking luck. And especially as Halloween and things roll around, which are great places to get Magic Find, I think it's important to do that because more and more people are hitting the cap. Maybe I'll do a video on this. It seems a bit dry and a bit mathsy, and I'm not very dry and mathsy kind of guy, which is why you'd see I don't often do. If I do a build video, it's more about the flavor and the idea of something rather than specific meticulous number crunching and benchmarking and stuff like that. So maybe that's a job more suited to someone else, but I'll tell you one thing. I am very much interested, and those who follow my streams will know this already, I am very much interested in getting a new Path of Fire account and seeing what it's like to go from 0 to hero again, but not necessarily raid focused or whatever. I just want to see what it's like to play Path of Fire without any Heart of Thorns at all, and you have no gliding, and see what it's like on that kind of world where you have nothing established, and that would include Magic Find. So I would know from that account whether it feels like unidentified gear doesn't do so well for me. It's a good question, and I wonder what you guys think about Magic Find being a bit more relevant in the game. It still doesn't feel that great to me. I don't know. It's a weird topic as well because I think you acclimate to the better loot you get very quickly, and then you don't quite realise that you are indeed getting better loot. 300% better loot, supposedly, but you just sort of don't identify that. Oh yeah, good question. Next we got Terafas, who says, WP, what is your opinion on the original dungeons still being in the new player experience that directs people to content as they level? Do you think it hurts players' perception of the game? I still believe they have a place, even if it's very limited, in modern Guild Wars 2, but directing new players to these dungeons when they were under 80 was not a great thing back in the day. Now it just feels like inviting new players to come check out all the work you put into a remodel of a house and then taking them through the overgrown backyard before showing them the fully redone kitchen inside. Wow, your metaphor got stretched a little bit there, but I absolutely agree. So there were a lot of comments about this kind of thing in the last Q&A because we were talking about the merits of overhauling, revamping, adding on to core Tyria. And I talked about how passionately I believe that needs to happen. Core Tyria dungeons are a big part of that, and I absolutely think that something needs to be looked at here. Because here's the truth of it. When you're below level 80, when you're a new player, when you've got no idea what gear you're using or have your traits unlocked and you've got no money behind you or any of those things, It's extremely easy to struggle. I know that there's been power creep, and I know that certain things have been added to dungeons that make them easier, like break bars and all the extra damage you get. But if you really go in AC and do that at level 25, I think, is the story mode, and you're in level 25 blue gear, and if you're in a full party, or even less, 3-4 man, which is also possible, and people will tell you is possible, because all you ever hear from veterans is how easy dungeons are now. If you go in those circumstances, they are still a challenge. In fact, that's another thing I kind of want to look into at some point, just for fun, go down on low-level characters. But they are a challenge, and especially if you're ignorant as a new player would be as to the best way to do things. And I think it's a terrible experience. You're either going to have that, or you're going to just join a random pug with vets who are doing it for the farm. And they'll carry you through things so blindly fast, you don't learn anything from that experience. You might feel like it was somewhat fun, but how fun is it really when you had absolutely no impact on the success of the run, and you have no idea as to why the run succeeded because these vets were with you, as opposed to other low-level people? That's before we even talk about the quality of the content itself in those dungeons. So, all of that said, yeah, I think it would be really good, especially for story mode, to strip away that idea of a story mode and the idea that it's level appropriate at lower levels, because it's just not. And maybe, start introducing people to that instant stuff later when you give people that mail about Fractals of the Mists. And Fractals are a more suitable environment for teaching people about that kind of content in this game, because they scale, and the lower tiers of Fractals, 1 to 25, are really easy, and exactly the kind of environment that those players need to be going into. I hate the thought that someone tries a dungeon as they're leveling, hates the experience either because it's A, too hard, or B, boring, and then they don't consider Fractals later. I think that sucks. So all of that there is to consider. Another thing, though, is I really, maybe it's just nostalgia goggles, but I really love the Guild Wars 1 campaign format of doing story. So this is the idea that you'd have specific moments outside of your primary quests, these campaign missions, where you want to be in a big party to complete them. Now, a lot of Guild Wars 1 content was party-based, basically. But that idea of campaign missions, that's kind of what story mode dungeons are trying to be in Guild Wars 2. It's just that they're optional. So, and I really like that. I think it'd be really good if the personal story encouraged you to meet other people and talk to other people and play with them. Not force you to play, in a team. Make the personal story still continue to be completable as an individual, but give people that incentive to team up. And that's what story mode dungeons do. So I'd like to see the story mode dungeons maybe not all become level 80 and just become regular dungeons, but actually be retuned and fully integrated into the story. I think that would be the best way to do things, and it would give people a much better experience. There's a lot you could go in on that, but definitely all of the personal story in the dungeons, the quality difference between that content, the kind of stuff you experience in Path of Fire and Heart of Thorns is quite large indeed. There's, more broadly speaking, a lot of things that could happen to dungeons. A lot of people I see are, and more frequently than before now, are advocates of the idea of turning dungeons into fractals, but maybe that's a topic for another day. Next, we got a question from Eddington, who said, "So I noticed how the Desolation has 2 entrances from the Ellen Riverlands. This, along with the giant wall, make me wonder if they ever had a plan for a Tangled Depths style meta, but with us breaking down the bone wall instead of into Dragon Stand with a side entrance so as to not lock the last map to the meta. What are your thoughts on this?" That's a really cool idea. I have never heard anyone suggest this. I never thought of this, but maybe you're right. Maybe you're onto something. So people that didn't play HOT or might not be clear on the details here, the third map back then, Tangled Depths, had 2 ways to exit. There was a side entrance to Dragon Stand that was a little bit sneakier, and the main story ended up taking you through. But there was also a large meta that involved breaking down a wall, and that would take you through what seemed to be the main entrance to the end of the story, the final map. That seemed to be the priority thing, but then the devs never quite had the balls to force people to do that, and they made the meta quite challenging in the end, and I think it took a long time for people to clear. And that's whether that was right or wrong, of course, is a slightly different discussion. But I wonder, yeah, maybe that's the format they were going with in Path of Fire, because again, at the end of the third map, what do we have? Kind of like 2 entrances, which is weird because there's not 2 entrances anywhere else. And you have to think about this. One of the main things I mentioned in my week of vlogs as Path of Fire came out, it really struck me how little story there is at the wall. Like, people talk about the wall a lot. The wall features very prominent geographically and on the map. It seems like a big point of interest. It seems like a cool, aspect of this campaign, this story. And then you just kind of walk up to the wall, and you walk through the wall, and then you're done. And it's like, well, what was that? That seems a bit weird. So yeah, maybe that was going to be some kind of big siege meta. You break through the wall, and then perhaps that was cut a bit later when they decided that they were going to shift emphasis away from meta events. Something like that. So maybe it wasn't a cut in the personal story at all. Maybe it was an open world thing. I love this comment. I think that you really might be onto something. That's very, very exciting and interesting, and it would explain the double entrances. Maybe they did it for the best this way. But where that balance is of whether there should be lots of large metas in an expansion or not remains to be seen. I have a feeling it's been different crowds complaining during the Heart of Thorns days as the crowd that's now complaining during the Path of Fire days. And I just wonder which is bigger. Is that who we cater to? Next, we have a question from Steph B. Very simple. Says, will we get an overview and installation guide video for that add-on in your corner? So this is referring to last week's footage where you were looking at something called Arc DPS. Oh, hold on. Or I'm a moron and that's a joke about the on-screen keyboard we had. I'm going to pretend you were asking about Arc, though, because that's how I originally answered this question. Shoot me. And it's some pretty cool software that gives you both a DPS meter, and some people will like that, some people won't, but also has build templates built into it. That, last I heard, had a slight bug that might be able to delete some of your gear, but generally I've got a lot of use out of and really enjoyed. The answer to your question is yes. We will get one. As to when exactly, hopefully not too long away. I do like doing community initiatives and community developed stuff, but I kind of have to pace it out because honestly, I'm scared that my audience really wants to watch them that much, and I have a feeling that if I did a whole week just full of those, which I could, people would stop watching quite quickly. So I want to pace them out so that each dev gets their due. And Arc is in a place really where they don't need me to cover it. It's well known by the community at this point. It doesn't need my endorsement to get kickstarted or anything. And I figured I'd prioritize some other stuff. Fun little fact, a while ago when I did the BGDM video, I actually made a decision. Did I want to do BGDM or did I want to cover Arc? And I deliberately decided to cover BGDM because on the website for BGDM, the developer had suggested they were going to be leaving Guild Wars 2 soon, and it probably wouldn't be updated. So knowing that, playing the long-term game, I decided I'll do BGDM now while it's relevant, and then Arc later when BGDM isn't relevant. And guess where we are now? So yeah, it will be coming. Obviously, I did a production last week, maybe the week before, with Boots on Heroes of the Mists, and I think now that that's done, maybe we can look at Arc DPS. For a lot of you established vets out there, it will be information you already know, but I know a lot of you out there are still looking for it. Next question, Lars Labyrinth says, do you think there is room in the story for the Elder Dragons to ever work together instead of solo at some point? Like us trying to use Jormag and Primordus and we fail and they join forces, or we find out the Deep Sea Dragon's influence is over other dragons and has been pulling strings from a distance. So there's a few levels to this. First, do you think the story would be cool? Second, do you think the story would actually happen this way based on the story we've been given, right? And as to the second of those, I don't think that can really happen. One thing struck me from one of the developer AMAs recently. It might not have been the Path of Fire one, it might have been the episode 6 one. But it really feels like one of the things they care a lot about adhering to and sticking true to when deciding what Elder Dragons do in this story and so on, is the idea that you can liken them to a natural disaster. And sometimes we've seen they've deviated from that, definitely, and especially like with Morgemorth and so forth. But there's actually a fairly contemporary quote from one of the writing team, kind of saying, this is pretty important to remember. This is one of the earliest things they were compared to in the movement of the world, and despite how much that's been played around with, that's a core facet of them. So if I think about that, if the question was, oh, we try and stop hurricanes being a thing, so now the hurricanes are going to ally with earthquakes. It doesn't work. So I think on that level, I doubt they would do it. There is another side as well, and would this be a cool story? I get your enthusiasm for it, but I think on that level, I must be honest, I'm not sure I like the sound of it too much. I actually think one of the coolest things about the Elder Dragons is that they are so scary and capable of destruction and death and so on, and they're not even trying. And it's not like malicious or capricious, it's just a thing that they're doing. And I like the idea that they're not necessarily agents working alongside one another, and that they would even, you know, they would butt heads if they hit one another's territories, that they're these primal forces. I think that's one of the strongest things about the Elder Dragons. It robs them of a lot of, you know, interesting story in terms of giving them good motivations and so forth. But we've paid the price of that robbery for so long now. I'd rather they at least keep that, you know, what's cool about them being primal there. So in short, what I'm saying is I think it would be cooler if they stayed vaguely against one another and could potentially be pitted against one another. Maybe as a sudden, whoa, I can't believe this is happening thing. It would be an interesting story arc. But beyond that, I don't know. Your second point about the deep sea dragon having influenced them all along, yeah, that could be pretty cool as a giant mindfuck at the end of the entire story. We'll see. Next question is from George Anderson, who says, "Hi WP, what about Menzies? Everyone was hyped up on the trailer when we thought that the Forge wearing the headless caged armor that was eventually purchasable in the gem store was him, but I'm guessing nothing ever came of it." Yeah, nothing ever came of it. I remember that very clearly when we did the post-show, and all I had to do was say, "Who is this, guys?" when it was paused, and everyone freaked out thinking it was Menzies. I will openly admit to getting on that idea as well, and then we were all wrong in the end. Menzies didn't really have much going on, but I think that these new current event style things that are happening in the game, and if you guys haven't caught those on the video I did earlier in the week, you should definitely check it out because it's pretty exciting. And these suggestions that we might be going to the underworld, I think all of that's really cool. Because remember, if Doom is like going to be a big antagonist coming forwards, Doom was in alliance with Abaddon and Menzies together. These guys interacted, and who's to say they wouldn't still, just as we are, you know, speculating that there'd be a power vacuum in the underworld, there would be one in the Fissure of Woe too. And even, especially now that Balthazar himself is gone, I wonder whether maybe early Living World Season 4 will deal with Doom and the underworld, and maybe that could be more raid or endgame focused, but the bulk of the season could be dealing with this half-brother Menzies, and he could sort of be one of the big antagonists of the season, if not the big antagonist, and we'll see how things roll out from there. We could learn more about the Shadow Army and so on. I think he's got a role to play in this story, I really do. And remember, there was that dev comment that they'd been wondering around the office which pronunciation to go with, Mingus or Menzies. Why would they be wondering that? Just out of curiosity themselves? I suppose so. Or were they maybe planning some story for him? Next question is from Walala, who says, "Hey WP, what do you think about how balance is handled by ArenaNet? Do you think they're updating fast enough, or should they go faster, at least for PvE? And should ArenaNet balance around open world fractals or raids in PvE?" You know, there's one thing I love about your question, and that's that you've not just identified that they've got world versus world PvP and PvE to balance around, but you've gone far enough to identify that even within PvE, there are these incredibly disparate sections of the game that call for different kinds of balance. The best balance in the game for, like, strong leveling up and really rewarding gaining new levels and unlocking traits and so forth is actually very different balance to anywhere else in PvE, and then obviously PvP and world versus world beyond that. So good on you. A lot of people just say to me, "Hey WP, what's the best Ellie build?" It's like, what do you mean what's the best Ellie build? Is it what game type? And within that game type, what role within that game type? And so few people actually recognize that. But so you've identified the core problem. They've got a ton of things that they're balancing around. And remember this, that they don't just have a massive fractured game with all these different things going on in it, but also the same guys responsible for balance right now are also being asked to develop elite specializations 2 years down the line. Or for release 2 years down the line, let's put it that way. So they've got to balance all of that. A lot of the balance we will see over the Path of Fire days will seem to make no sense to us, will look completely incompetent. But later, in retrospect, hopefully we'll see that they're just making space and shuffling things around for the next elite spec, such as some of the Tempest nerfs that we saw and some other things. So, yeah, I think they've got a hell of a job. And then when you look at all of that, maybe it's okay that they're only putting it out once every 3 months. But I don't know if I can get bored with that. Listen, I've been saying for a long time, monthly balance. Please, for the love of God, monthly balance. And you have to understand, when I say that, It's not that I'm expecting them to magically put out triple the amount of work and have, you know, the same size patches we currently have, but just every month now. I say monthly balance because it has the advantage of if something's overblown or undertuned, it doesn't last very long before it can be quickly addressed and moved on. We see Mirage at the moment, as I record this video, is extremely powerful, and it's basically the result of a lot of bugs being fixed all at once, and unforeseen consequences for a basically essentially different build on the raiding scene. And if we had monthly balance, things like that could be anticipated and circumvented because they can do a little more piecemeal things. Guild Wars has always been in a weird place where half the community has complained that they don't do big enough changes, and the other half has been at the same time complaining that they use a hammer instead of a chisel. But I think that monthly balance solves a lot of those problems. And on the community end too, let's imagine you are a thief and you're really disappointed with the current patch. If you know you only have to wait 30 days or less, right, for a new patch and hopefully something to be turned around for you, you're going to be a lot less upset when balance is bad than knowing you have to wait quarter of a year. Monthly balance just seems so good to me, and again, I find myself looking back to my Guild Wars 1 days. I think my heyday, for PvP at least, and when I used to play a lot of random and team arenas, they were doing monthly balance back then. I thought it worked well, and it gives them freedom. It's not about magically getting more balance work done. It's just it's about being agile, and that's how I feel. Hopefully they'll get to that at some point. But for now, we're on quarterly, and as much as I just did all that complaining, anyone who's been with Guild Wars 2 for all 5 years knows full well the world we're in right now, the size of the patches and the general direction of the patches is about 1,000 times better than it was, say, 3 years ago, where it was much less frequent, and they seem to have absolutely no idea. So yeah. Well, that's about 20 minutes, so I guess I will leave it there. We've got one more comment from Brian Hett, who had a lovely message, probably my favourite comment from the previous week's video, in reference to the lovely gameplay I had all up for you, which was this: WP, this gameplay is simply imbecilic. I don't think I can watch. Thanks very much for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed. It'll be Patreon questions next week, so if you are over there, or you're interested in going over there, there's a link at the very top of the description. Please do consider it, and drop your comments there for me. There, I'll answer pretty much anything from real life to mount adoption contracts, and we'll try and go into as much detail as possible. So thanks, guys. I'll see you next time.